I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the ongoing controversy over whether Prime Minister Netanyahu should address a joint session of Congress or whether such an address is a diplomatic affront to the President of the United States, which therefore requires the Israeli Prime Minister to cancel his scheduled address. And we haven't seen in quite some time a controversy that's generated this much passion within the Jewish community. In Israel, political rivals of Mr. Netanyahu are charging him with grandstanding before Israeli elections toward the middle of March. And there are those suggesting that Mr. Netanyahu is doing grave damage to U.S.-Israeli relations by exacerbating partisan politics in Congress, where up till now there's been major bipartisan congressional support for Israel. On the other hand, one of the world's leading columnists out of Israel, Izzy Liebler, published a very strong piece critical of American Jewish leadership entitled Obama's Shameless Jewish Cheerleaders, in which Liebler not only points a finger at J Street and New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, but calls out the ADL's Abe Foxman and the URJ's Rick Jacobs for calling on Netanyahu to rescind his acceptance. Liebler suggests that with some notable exceptions, such as Conference of Presidents Malcolm Hoenlein and ZOA's Mort Klein, the behavior of American Jewish leadership is mimicking the failures of Rabbi Stephen Wise, who in 1944 convinced Jewish leaders not to embarrass President Roosevelt over saving European Jewry. It's also quite interesting to note that the American Jewish Committee, normally in the forefront of Jewish issues, has taken a formal position that it will make no public statement on this controversy over Netanyahu speaking to Congress. Well, for some perspective and analysis of the issue, we're very pleased to have on our phones right now the Deputy National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Ken Jacobson. Ken, good to talk to you again, and thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to join with you.
So, Ken, first, in general, what do you make of the way this issue has mushroomed throughout the Jewish community? What's behind it?
I think it's one of the saddest events that we've seen, an unnecessary event.
Yes.
Mostly because the Prime Minister is so correct on being concerned about, of course, the Iranian threat, what it means to the world, what it means to Israel, and legitimate concern about where the Obama administration is going in the negotiations. I agree with him, and I think we do too, that there are significant issues. We support, for example, the idea of new sanctions if the talks fail. So we share with the Prime Minister very strongly the concerns that we have. We just think this is a big mistake, and your description of the controversy really points out what a mistake it is. I mean, I find Izzy Liebler's kind of reaction to this to be so outrageous, to suggest that someone like Abe Foxman, who's been out in the front strongly defending Israel on just about every issue, similar to the thing, is really outrageous, and it's just a sign of the tenor and the incivility that we have too often in our community. But these are very serious issues, and of course, as I said, I think these issues are one of the most serious ones facing, but this doesn't help the issue. It doesn't. First of all, the bipartisan support has been the jewel in the crown of the relationship. When we just think of how over the last 6 years, the way Congress has been divided on just about every issue. But we've avoided that essentially with regard to American support for the State of Israel. Why in the world would we want to undermine that when at this very time Israel is going to be coming to the United States for tremendous support? You know, the Palestinians are going to once again go to the Security Council probably in the spring or June or somewhere around then to want to introduce again that resolution, that horrible resolution. The United States made it clear that it would veto that resolution.
Yes.
Now Israel will go again to the United States. Of course, I hope that the United States will do it, but why do you want to undermine that by personally, in effect, be seen as attacking not only the President of the United States, but putting Democrats in the worst possible situation, because many of them were ready to support Israel and support us in calling for new sanctions, but now they don't want to be seen to be opposing their own president. So I agree completely with the assessment of the seriousness of the problem. It's just that the way it's going about is actually counterproductive and undermines what we should all be talking about, not this controversy, but what do we do to prevent Iran from going nuclear?
I hear you're disappointed in the way this whole controversy is being expressed, and there's a certain kind of vitriol that is very unfortunate. I can't understand. I'm not sure I understand where you stand. Are you critical of the Prime Minister for accepting John Boehner's invitation?
Yes, we think that it was ill-advised by the Prime Minister to do this because of all the reasons that I stated. Now, having done this, once he comes, we're urging people to support the Prime Minister of Israel. First of all, it's the appropriate thing to do. Secondly, the issues, as I say, that are being raised are very significant issues. It's just that this was a counterproductive effort. So, yes, we thought it was ill-advised. It would have been better had he not done it. But if it's happening already, then, of course, we will support it, and we're urging members of Congress to appear and to support Israel. But that doesn't mean that there won't be lingering resentments that I'm afraid, just today, for example, there was a story about how the United States is maybe withholding certain information about the negotiations about Iran with Israel because they feel that some of the issues have been used. Now, I don't know. I can't testify to the validity of that statement. I'm not defending the administration for doing that, but we're already beginning to see the impact of this unnecessary controversy.
Okay, what I want to understand is, when you first, if you had been told from the start, you know, the Congress of the United States, which happens to now have a Republican House Speaker, is inviting the Prime Minister to come speak to Congress about the Iranian threat. Why would you have, you know, in a private conversation with the Prime Minister, said to him, Mr. Prime Minister, we hope you don't accept that invitation? Why would you have a priori been against Netanyahu's coming?
No, we wouldn't have said that to him. Had we had the opportunity, we would have said, okay, so consult with the Democrats. Have you consulted with the Democratic leadership in Congress? Have you consulted with the President of the United States to say that you've been invited and you'd like to do this, and what's the reaction? That's what we would have said to him.
You would have wanted there to be a confirmation.
That's correct.
That there was bipartisan.
I would have made a complete. Listen, if the Democratic leadership were okay and the White House knew about this, and they were, you know, even though they disagree with the Congress on the issue of new sanctions, which, as I said, we support, very much support, we would have been fine. On the contrary, that would have been a very good thing. But that's exactly not what happened. And
what would have been the reaction, do you think, if the Prime Minister had said to John Boehner, you know, I'm not interested in coming, or I'm worried that there will not be bipartisan support? What if the Prime Minister had rejected the invitation?
I don't think he would have done that. I think he's much smarter than that. I think he would have said, I would have liked him to have said, but look, I think here's the thing. We're focusing on this controversy and question after question, as opposed to the fact is it's happened. I've made the point of why we thought it was counterproductive and undermines bipartisan support and even the effort to counter Iran. But now it looks like it's happening. There's no indication it won't. So now the question is we should talk about is how do we keep our eye on the ball and how do we move forward?
I understand. And I don't mean to beat the dead horse here. I just want to make sure I understand. You think it was you're worried it was counterproductive because why?
It undermines bipartisan support for Israel, which, as I said, has been the jewel in the crown, the really essence of the relationship. It hasn't been a political football, essentially, for decades. Secondly, it diverts attention from the real issue. Here it is. You and I should be talking about how do we stop Iran from getting a bond, and we're spending all this time talking about the country. That's what's happening all over the country and in Israel. And thirdly, it makes it harder for Democrats to stand up against some of the things that are going on because they don't want to be seen as being opposed to the president and the Democratic leadership, which were left out of this process.
Okay, you do know that there are many Democrats who are very concerned about the administration's policy vis-a-vis Iran.
That's exactly my point. I know that very well, and the truth is there might have been a chance to get new sanctions.
They don't have a problem. They don't have a problem with this invitation.
Well, I don't know that what people are saying publicly and privately, but the fact of the matter is, it's not. The fact of the matter is, I know there are many Democrats who have big problems. Listen, Menendez has been introducing the bills on new sanctions. But it makes life much more difficult.
You think Menendez is opposed to Netanyahu's addressing?
I don't have no idea. I don't know what his view is of that. I'm just simply saying it makes it much more difficult for Democrats who would like to be more public, speaking out against the administration's approach, to do so when they feel that the Democratic Party is being dissed here, if you will. Yeah.
There's something about this that just rankles me. To think that there are Democrats who would be supportive of Israel, but because because the President of the United States and the administration, I don't want to personalize it, the administration has a certain view of negotiating with Iran, which may produce, especially from Israel's perspective and many Jewish perspective, a bad deal with Iran. That therefore they're torn about their bipartisan support or the democratic support of the State of Israel.
But
it worries me that we would worry about this. It worries me, Ken, that we would worry about this.
Okay, I worry because I worry about many of those things. All I'm saying is exactly because I worry about the level of support was why it again comes back to the point that this was an unnecessary thing. If it would have been done in a bipartisan way, we would be talking, and all the effort would be to say, are we happy or not happy with the administration's policy, which I, again, wish we would start talking about.
Yes.
Because you continue to... I know it's good news for you, but I think we're playing into the hands of all the wrong elements by continuing to talk about it. We made our point, and others agree or disagree. I strongly resent the kind of charges that you read from Izzy Lieber, that kind of thing. People have a right to disagree about it. But the real point is, let's move forward, and let's talk about, for example, what Henry Kissinger described when he testified recently about the real problem with where the administration seems to be going.
Yes,
that
I understand.
Should be the issue, and instead we've made this the issue.
Yes, but it has become the issue. And in my notes, what I do want to talk to you about it is the central issue that drives it, the reason that Netanyahu was invited to speak to a joint session of Congress, namely the Iranian policy of the American administration. But I won't let this go until I really understand and have the audience have a chance to hear your point.
I've made it several times.
Let me just ask the question. Do you think that the Prime Minister of Israel did something in accepting John Boehner's invitation, purposefully doing something that would embarrass either congressional Democrats or the White House? Or do you feel it was simply a mistake and that no ill was intended?
I don't believe either one of those, actually. I do believe it was a mistake, but I don't think that gets to the core of it. I don't for a second question the Prime Minister's motives. I don't buy into the election stuff or embarrassing. That's not what it's about. It's much more serious, and I give him credit for that. I just think it still is a mistake. Basically, the Prime Minister feels this is a moment that he had to do it, that he felt like, I think, that he couldn't live with himself and in history, and to do this because he was very concerned. I understand all of that, and I believe that's what his motive is, and I give him credit for thinking that way. But that doesn't mean you then stop examining what's the impact of what you do. And so what I'm saying is, I I completely understand his thinking. I don't for a second question his motives, but I think this was a mistake and not the way to do it. The way to do it was to talk about, you used the term, everybody used the term, a joint session of Congress. But the truth is, this wasn't presented as a joint session because the Democratic leadership was not consulted. That's what a true joint session is. You consult both sides. And so I, for a second, do not question the motives of the Prime Minister.
You blame John Boehner, then?
I don't blame you. All I'm saying is this is a mistake.
Okay. By the way, is this the worst the relationship has been between an American president and an Israeli prime minister, which is something I hear thrown around all the time?
Yeah, you know what? I think these things are overstated. Look, I judge Americans' support for Israel. There are many, many levels in which one does it, but you come down to basics. Is America vetoing Security Council resolutions that are harmful for Israel, and is America supporting Israel on the security level? And on both scores, till now, the United States has been as good as any other administration. I have many other issues with this administration regarding Israel, but when you come to those basics, when the Palestinians introduced this harmful resolution to the Security Council, the administration made it clear if they got the 9 votes in the Council, the U.S. would veto it and it wouldn't happen. Secondly, on security matters, in the middle of the war, the United States provided $220 million more for Israel for Iron Dome. So those are the things, and so, you know, I have many issues in some of the ways the administration has handled from the very beginning when they made the settlement issue the prime issue and when the president didn't visit Israel after. There were many issues I could raise about the administration, the way it's handled it. But, again, there are people who just want to overstate it. I think U.S.-Israel relations have been solid despite the personal issues, and I'm hoping they will continue to be so, but we have real concerns about this unnecessary controversy.
Well, I think you say it perfectly, and, you know, do I think there is certain a tone between Netanyahu and Obama that's unfortunate? Yes. But anybody who calls this the worst, the nadir of the Israel-U.S. relationship has no sense of history. They don't remember the Ford Rabin flap. They don't remember the way American administrations were very upset with Yitzhak Shamir. There have been much worse problems than the ones we're facing now.
But that's not, you see, but the point is when people overstate it, that then leads to sometimes explanations and things that are really over the top, such as Izzy Liebler's thing. Because Izzy Liebler, his kind of commentary is predicated on the idea this administration is the worst thing since, you know, so.
I understand. By the way, you know, I understand your point about Izzy. I think that one can have a legitimate position that the American Jewish leadership has taken a position in public that has not supported the Israeli prime minister, and that for some Israelis and for some Jews, that's very disappointing. So, you know, I know that it sort of hits closer to home because Izzy Liebler singled out, one of the people he singled out was the ADL's Abe Foxman, who's just been fabulous on so many issues. But I'm not as critical of Izzy as you are, Ken.
Okay, you're asking me questions. I'm giving you my point of view.
Okay, fair enough. So talk about the Iranian issue itself, which, again, was the real reason that Netanyahu was invited. You define a joint session of Congress, interestingly, that it comes from both the Democratic and Republican leadership. The common sense notion is that when Netanyahu appears, he'll be speaking to all of Congress, a joint session of Congress. But in any case, I want to know the extent to which you worry now that the administration policy dealing with Iran may lead it to make what Israel and other critics of the administration would call a bad deal with Iran.
Yeah, we do worry about that, for sure. To his credit, the president has repeated, as has Secretary of State Kerry, on numerous occasions, that the same position that the Israelis have articulated, which is better no deal than a bad deal.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, someone like Henry Kissinger, who I still pay a lot of attention to,
yes,
when he testified, he said that the original purpose of this was to deny Iran the capability to develop a military nuclear option. And today they're talking about the scope of that capability, not denying capability. In other words, there's going to be a one-year process where they can't break out in less than a year. And here's where I think it undermines so much. From everything we know, that seems to be the approach. And I've been making this, I made this point to the French foreign minister at a meeting in the General Assembly in the fall, I think it was 2004 or 5, in which he commented one point of the meeting with the group of representatives of Jewish organizations. He said, we may have to learn to live with an Iranian nuclear bomb. And I raised my hand. I said, sir, there are two peoples in the Middle East who cannot live with an Iranian bomb. I don't even want to talk about the most obvious ones, which are the Israelis. Let's talk about the Arabs who can't live with an. And I said, if we're going to develop that approach to things, you're going to see Saudi Arabia and Egypt and others building their own bombs, and we're going to have the nuclear proliferation that's going to threaten not only the whole Middle East, but the whole world. Nuclear Armageddon, that's the formula. And that's been the underlying thing. This isn't an Israel-Jewish issue. It's an issue for the world. And the president has articulated the greatest threat comes from a nuclear Iran is the proliferation of nuclear weapons all through that dangerous region, which is going crazy anyway. So here it is now. We're talking about Iran not developing the case, but being on the threshold. We just, as someone said in the talk to us, they'll have to turn on the lights. Now, it may take them a year to turn the lights on, but the lights are basically there under the system that seems to be negotiated. So, yes, what Kissinger said is something that I feel the fundamental infrastructure is not being dealt with, but the question of how long it will take them to emerge if they violate the agreement. So I think we have a real problem, and I think it's very important to get the message. We're all working hard at it. We need to continue to work hard to try to make it clear that this is right now. But, of course, we don't pretend to know everything about the negotiation. The administration's point of view is people are saying things about their position which are not accurate. I hope that's true, and I hope that they're much stronger than some of us fear.
Yes. And we will see in a very short period of time, Ken.
Yep.
I have a few more moments with you. I want to ask you a related question because, in essence, the ADL has this remarkable reputation and history of not only combating anti-Semitism, but also dealing with all kinds of terror and discrimination and hatred and bigotry of any form throughout the world. And another very contentious issue on the American scene these days, Ken, is how we label the terrorist threat that is coming out of the Middle East, out of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and whether the term Islamic jihad or radical Islam is a term that should or should not be used when one describes the terrorism that basically is confronting the West at the moment. And I want to know your position. How do you feel about the fact that the administration doesn't seem to want to use the term, any term, for this terrorist activity that involves the use of the word Islam? And there are those who are very critical of the administration and feel that it is necessary to call it what it is. Where do you stand on this issue?
This is a no-brainer. Abe Foxman had a piece about this recently, even before Tom Friedman, and then, of all people, Roger Cohen had pieces, and we said exactly that. This is a no-brainer. It's really ridiculous not to call it what it is, which is Islamic extremism, Islamic violence, whatever you want to call it, because this isn't good for us to do that, and it isn't good for the Muslim world. What you need to do is to begin to bolster people somewhere in the Muslim world who can begin to really stand up and try to bring reform in the Muslim world that can change it. The thing is, the president spoke at that prayer breakfast, and he got criticism for saying, Christianity had its time too in the Middle Ages, the Inquisition, and, it was kind of silly to bring back some things from so many years, but there still is a point. And the real point is, you know what? That prejudice that came out that violence that came out back in the Crusades and Inquisition did come out of Christianity. It didn't necessarily represent all Christians, but it wasn't unrelated to Christianity. And so today, the terrorism and hatred and violence that's coming out doesn't represent necessarily most Muslims, but it does come out within Islam. So we don't help ourselves. We don't help people who want to change things in the Muslim world by not saying what it is and being intimidated by the charge that if you criticize Muslim extremists as opposed to Islam as a religion or most Muslims, that you're an Islamophobe is just intimidation, and we shouldn't allow it. So I agree completely with the criticism. We should call it like it is.
That's a pretty strong statement, and I appreciate it, Ken. By the way, did it bother you? You quoted an actual specific issue that has received a lot of attention in the news. Another comment that seemed to bother people is that when the president talked about the murder of 4 people in the supermarket in Paris, he called it a random shooting rather than calling it a shooting of Jews. And now, of course, we have the murder of a Jew in front of the main synagogue of Copenhagen. Does it matter, Ken, whether it's called, whether it's identified as a sort of an anti-Semitic act where Jews are being targeted?
It matters 100%. If you don't identify what the problem is, you can't solve the problem. It's anti-Semitism. The real problem, the president made a slip, which one could be critical of. The truth is, he, on several other occasions, he identified what happened in Paris as anti-Semitism. So had he not done that, we would have been much more critical of him. But the real problem was that 2 of his spokespeople, I should say one, the White House spokesperson, and then later the State Department, in answering questions, but made it far, far worse, and they continued it, when in truth, the president did make a slip, but he had, on several earlier occasions, he had clearly referred to it as anti-Semitism, and of course it matters. If you don't say anti-Semitism, and when it is anti-Semitism, then how are you going to combat it, and how are you going to get good people to join with it? So again, there's this kind of political correctness that creeps in. We talked about it with the Islamic radicalism. The president is not guilty of doing this generally on this issue. He was clear about it. But the fact that his spokespeople were so nervous in their ridiculous explanations, I think reinforces of the need to call it like it is.
The first time I spoke with you was back in the 1990s. Wow. And I've had the conversations with you over and over, time and time again. You're one of my favorite people in the world, and you are courageous. And I appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to really stick your neck out at times and say what you believe, whether you think is politically correct or not. You are a tremendous defender of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and humanity as a whole, and I am always honored to have you on JBS, Ken, so I'll call you off. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, and it's always a pleasure, Mo.
You be well. Thank you very much. Ken Jacobson, Deputy National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. My thanks, as always, to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg for producing this edition of In the News, and our producer, Jan Weiss, for this edition of In the News. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.